if you're ready, we can get started. Would you like to introduce yourself?
My name is Tony Weaver Jr. And I am a social entrepreneur, a voice actor, a Pokemon card player, but I'm also an author. I wrote a book called WEIRDO, and that is the thing that I hope people know me for these days.
Okay. And I am Leah Nicole Whitcomb. I am a community storyteller from Mississippi. I tend to write about Black folks, love, and magic. And today I'm talking about my book about the boy is a young adult romance. And I'm excited to talk with you about it today. So I'm just going to start with my question for you about WEIRDO. It is a graphic memoir, it's your graphic memoir, and it delves into some really heavy topics, just like suicide and bullying and mental illness. And so I was wondering, what was the process for you when you were revisiting these events? And did writing this memoir help you heal through it?
I think for me, writing a book about youth mental health that directly references events from what is frankly like one of the most difficult mental health moments that I've had in my life. It's certainly something that humbled me. The huge thing that I felt when I was writing it was that in order to write that experience genuinely, I had to return to this place of like helplessness. Because when you're a child, if you're struggling with your mental health and you don't have access to resources and you don't have anybody to talk to, there isn't really anything that you can do. So returning to that feeling was something that humbled me a lot, but it made me feel like the book was even more important, if that made sense. I learned to be a little nicer to myself. There were some biases and kind of negative self-speak, negative narratives that I had about myself that I didn't realize until I started writing the book. So it helped me work through those. But I think it humbled me is the short version. I'm curious about the subject matter that you chose and why.
So in About the Boy, I was writing about autism. And so the reason that I did that, I had just recently found out I was autistic, which I always think is a funny story because up to like 5 years before that, autistic people were coming to me and being like, twin. And I was like, wow, that is so offensive. Why would you? But they were right. They were right. And I think for me, I had never had examples of what autism looked like for Black girls. And so I didn't know what that looked like until I had been around other Black autistic women. And I was like, oh, I am autistic. And so I wanted to write a narrative about autism that was pushing back against a lot of our like misconceptions about it, while also creating this character who I felt was a good representation of what it looked like for Black girls, because we often don't see it in Black people, and we also often don't see representation of girls. And so I was doing them both.
So as someone that's like kind of has a relationship with neurodivergence and is kind of looked at how to demonstrate that on the page, what to you makes a good autistic character?
That's a good question. I think for me, when I was creating Naima, it was a mix of thinking about myself as a teenager, thinking about like the things that kept coming up for me. And I was also in support groups with other autistic women. And so I was seeing both the similarities and some of the differences. Like one thing that tends to be common with autistic girls is they get in trouble a lot in school. And I was like the exact opposite of that. But I did use that in terms of creating Naima because that was a very common experience. So I was just really looking for like common experiences either I shared or I didn't share, and putting those together to try to create Naima, and then imagining what that would look like in like real world scenarios.
That makes sense. I hear it.
So my question for you is that so much of this graphic memoir really resonated with my own life. Like I was also bullied as a young child for being different. And I was accused of plagiarism by my white teachers because my papers were too well written. And then also, I had Black peers who were accusing me of wanting to be white. And then even like the parents not caring about it and not caring about how being in a predominantly white environment affects you. And they kind of just tell you to like adapt. And then when you do adapt, or if you adapt in ways they don't like if you assimilate, they think you're a bad child. And so, as important as I think narratives like this is, I've often heard complaints from like Black readers about the token Black character and how these stories are often highlighted over other Black stories. And I'm wondering, did you battle any of those thoughts while compiling this memoir? Um, and what do you think about this idea that like that is overdone? I do want to say that towards the end of your memoir, it is not about like the token Black character, but towards the beginning, it kind of is. So I was kind of wondering, did you battle any of these thoughts while writing this?
Well, I think when writing Weirdo, my largest, the largest thing that I cared about was being genuine and truthful to the world of the story and the events that took place in my life. So I think certainly when outlining, there were certain events that were super impactful and important for me that I didn't necessarily think would be compelling in a book format. But for the things that I did choose, I never thought to myself, okay, are our token Black kid stories, or stories where there's only one Black kid, is that something that's overdone? Because for me, I'm like, if we're being honest about it, I think most things that we find across significant pieces of literature that feature Black kids are overdone. Like, I I like sports, I guess, like a little bit, like 2 out of 10, I guess. Like I don't hate sports, but almost every book where I go and try to find a Black boy, it's like football or basketball, or he wants to be a rapper, or he loves sneakers, or he's running from the law. And I feel like all those people that tell those stories are like, well, this is rooted in my truth, and therefore I feel like it's a story that needs to be told. And I say, well, if they can stand in that truth, then I can stand in mine and not particularly feel bad about it.
Mm. I think another thing is also like, as Black people, I don't know your heritage, but I'm Black American, and I have ancestors that quite literally could not write their own stories. And so I don't think any Black story is overdone, but I do think that like sometimes the publishing industry will like emphasize some over others. So that's just me personally.
So it's actually ironic you said that. You said you know my ancestry. I'm like, ooh, do I look African? That'd be cool. I've had some people think that I'm like Nigerian or like Ghanaian sometimes. I'm from Atlanta.
Oh,
I'm from
okay.
Atlanta. My parents from Atlanta. My parents are from Atlanta. I know nothing of my family line outside of the fact that we were all tied to that godforsaken place. Um,
I'm from Mississippi, so.
okay. I think like the point that you brought up about how it's like, listen, there's room for all Black stories, but the industry kind of promotes a very specific kind or a very specific type. It's certainly something that I dealt with, not just in subject matter for Black students, like what Black characters are allowed, but also the depth that Black stories are allowed to have. I think very often publishing will take books that claim to address or approach or dissect these very large ideas: classism, racism, colorism, discrimination. Um, they'll take these big ideas, and then the book will like dip their toe in the pool. Like it'll talk about it like this much. It'll get mentioned like this much. It'll be a very like adjacent kind of tangential plot point. And all the book reviewers would be like, gripping, vital, important, award worthy, an awe-inspiring tale. And I'm over here reading it like, man, he ain't even say nothing. Like he kind of just vaguely motioned at a thing. Like people can write a book with a Black character and be like, Black kids deal with racism sometimes. And people will be like, give them all the awards, give them all the stuff. Wow, how could you be so courageous to say such a thing? Um, and that's a pet peeve of mine. I'm like, if we're gonna write it, if we're gonna talk about it, like I want to I want to do it. If we're gonna dive into it, I want to actually do the thing. Was there anything around autism where when you started writing, you said, I don't feel like this is being done right? Or where you said, it's very important to me that we look at the subject matter through this lens?
Yes, there there was a lot that I felt wasn't being done right. When I think about representation that isn't done well, I think a lot of it kind of became more about symptoms
Mm.
and not about people. And I wanted Naima to feel like a real person. I was very happy when I had a review that was like, Naima is not just a whole bunch of was like symptoms put together.
Mm.
She feels like a real person. She has real problems that are separate from autism. I think that was the main problem that I saw with autism rep. It was like the savant who is like really good at this one thing, and that's their role in society, is like being a genius at something. But it's like, no, regular everyday people have autism. And also, autism is not the worst thing about me. I see a lot, and this mainly comes from like white autistics, say that like being autistic is the worst thing in the world, that we don't know what it's like to live in a world that's not made for you. And I'm like, bitch, I'm black. Like,
Mm.
I do know, like, being autistic for me is not the worst thing in my life. It does impact my life in some way, but it's not the worst thing. And so that was really what I wanted to focus on, is that, like, yeah, she's black. Yeah, she's a girl. Yeah, she's autistic. She does deal with these systems, but that's not all of who she is.
I think of like the Big Bang Theory a lot
Mm,
because
a lot of
it frustrates
them.
me. It frustrates me. The Big Bang Theory feels like it was written by someone that's like has never actually spent time with nerds. Like it feels like the Big Bang Theory feels like nerdy voyeurism on the behalf of
Mm,
neurotypicals. Like that's what it feels like. It feels like neurotypical people looking at these caricatures of nerdy people in a zoo. Is kind of the way that it feels, and I think that happens in books a lot too, because it's very trendy to say, let me give my character this condition or this thing or this drawback. That way they have a conflict that's like immediately baked in that they have to deal with. And that way I don't have to do any of the work of characterizing or storytelling. And in Weirdo, I think I never wanted the mental health part to feel that way. To feel like, well, since we're talking about mental health and we're doing this other thing, then maybe I can cut corners on every other part of the story. I tried to build something that was consistent and kind of in depth enough that even outside of those factors, it'd be important.
So I have a question, or another question. So in this memoir, you decided to shy away from romance for baby Tony, and in the story, he has big feelings for his lab partner, but when they're not reciprocated, instead of internalizing it as a representation of his self-worth, he accepted that both their feelings were valid, and his feelings towards her did not override her lack of feelings towards him.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm wondering if this is something that you realized in the moment or something you realized in hindsight. And why did you feel that this was necessary for the story?
It's definitely something that I realized in hindsight. The crush chapter, when we were putting together like the outline of the book, the crush chapter is one of the chapters where it was like, do we need this chapter? Can this be cut? And I'm like, no, we need it because young boys need to learn how to take no for an answer. They just need to know how to take no for an answer. Because when they don't know how to take no for an answer, they end up in the hands of like all these podcaster dudes that tell them that like women are the problem and that they need to be alphas and blah blah blah. It's like, nah, bro, you just need to learn how to accept no. It's fine. There are billions of people in the world. Why are we sweating? Why are we sweating over one person? I think when I was younger, the positive thing that pops up in Weirdo is that anime encouraged me in a lot of ways. But I think that if you grow up watching anime as a young boy that doesn't really have a grip on reality, you start to become entitled to certain things.
Mm.
Like think about a show like Rosario Vampire, where this new kid shows up to this school full of monsters, and suddenly every cute girl wants him. All of them. Every cute girl is into him. Like any anime that has a harem element, like you look at Sword Art Online, where Kirito, like Asuna just falls in love with Kirito immediately. Asuna leaves her job as second in command at the largest guild in the server to go and be Kirito's housewife. And then they meet the sniper girl, and the sniper girl has a crush on Kirito, and it turns out that she's actually his cousin. But like, how could she have known? Because Kirito is just so charming. He's so great. Boys get a lot of stories like that, especially in anime. And it creates this mental idea that, well, if she doesn't pick me, then she doesn't know how to choose. I need to make her understand why. I need to make her understand why I'm so important. Fall Out Boy is one of my favorite bands when I was growing up. Still is. I love those guys. But you put on some of the Fall Out Boy songs, like from under the cork tree, Patrick is like belting. He's like, she wouldn't know a good thing if it came up her slit. He's like, she doesn't know. Doesn't know how great I am for her, how amazing I am. How dare she deny me? And you gotta unlearn that stuff, man. You gotta learn how to think outside that stuff. It's not fair to you. It's not fair to the young women that you want to be involved with, and it's certainly not fair to the women that have to deal with you throwing temper tantrums when they tell you no. Especially when a temper tantrum is the best case scenario for things that a man can possibly do when he feels scorned. You gotta just learn how to accept no.
That was one of my favorite parts in this whole graphic memoir, because I was like, I don't think I've ever seen that before. Someone being like, oh, this person doesn't want me. It's not the end of the world.
There's that stereotype that all the podcasters like to say, where they talk about how women are emotional and men are logical. And I'm just, no, I think men are like very deeply led by our emotions. Entire wars have been fought because somebody was in their feelings. Truly. The emotional regulation for a lot of men just isn't there. And I think for young boys, especially young Black boys, we basically get two things, right? You get your like hyper masculine rapper where it's like, I get all the girls love me. There are too many girls on me. Even though I have all this money, I don't want to give it to these girls though. But they're here because of the money. They want all of it. You don't have no girls around you, get some money so you can get the girls. And that's just that's just what it is, man. I got to get my money up. I don't know. And then on the other side, you have nerdy Black dudes who, to be clear, I like am deeply influenced by and respect greatly. But if you look at some of the early emotions that are communicated in like Tyler the Creator's music, in Childish Gambino's music, that rejection hit them really hard. And as a kid, I really appreciated that because the rejection was hitting me hard too. Like, bro, I get it. Tyler the Creator is great, but I was introduced to him via a song that he wrote about looking through a girl's window after she got out of the shower. It's like, that just is what it is. Like, that's what it is. So we gotta give alternatives to that, like in some way, because Tyler the Creator grew out of it. Like, he obviously feels very different now, and like his music is just an expression of wherever he is in his personal growth and development journey at the time. But there are a lot of dudes that don't grow out of that. They stay there, and that can be a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to say for y'all in the comments, if you have any questions, please let us know. So I want to ask, I have another question, Tony. So at the end of this book, Tony found his tribe full of awkward, weird Black kids. And I personally resonated a lot with Claire and a little bit with Cornelius. But I'm curious how long this journey from being alienated to accepted took for you. And I know in the acknowledgments you said you kind of fudged the timeline.
Mm-hmm. So in WEIRDO, all of the events in WEIRDO happened, but the timeline was a little off because it covered things that happened from when I was in middle school all the way through when I was in high school. So the bit at the end about my school closing, which is funny because I have gotten some feedback from some people where they were like, oh, the ending kind of wrapped things up too nicely. And I'm like, well, that's what happened. I don't know what to tell you. That's what happened. That is my life. The Board of Regents did legitimately attempt to shut down my school, and we had to do a whole community campaign to keep the school open. Like, that's a real thing. That happened. So it's interesting. People are like, well, that doesn't feel realistic. And I'm like, the book is called WEIRDO. I don't know what made you think I was going to be realistic in the first place, but that is what happened. So a lot of the events in the book cover middle and high school. even though like we kind of say middle school age, that just felt like the smart thing to do. I think for me, this idea of feeling accepted is something that I had reached a pretty good part of by the time I was in like 10th, 11th grade. But I think the journey to self-worth and self-value is a path that we're constantly walking. It's a path that we're constantly taking. By the time I hit a point where I felt really strong about my mental health, I was still like, there were still qualifiers. It's like, I feel good about myself as long as I don't gain any more weight. Like, I feel good about myself as long as I keep my muscles. I feel good about myself as long as my hair stays the exact way that it looks. I feel good about myself as long as I'm doing better than that person over there. Stuff like that. Those are the things that I think in adulthood I like learned to work through. I'm curious about like, if your book explores relationships and you're talking about like neurodivergence through kind of your main character, what is the thought process that goes into determining what healthy love looks like for a character like that? Because I think just in real life in general, everybody has different ideas. But what was it to you, and what was important to communicate?
Yeah. So my book about the boy, it is a romance, so it does deal with romantic relationships. But for me, I think it was very important to communicate the fact that all of our relationships are impactful. And I think especially in young adult, a lot of the young adult romance I read tends to be coming of age and romance, because it really wants to emphasize like romance is an addition to learning about yourself. It is not like the thing that you need to strive towards.
Mm-hmm.
And so in this, I really wanted to focus on like friendship, like Naima, the main character, her best friend's Luna, and their friendship is one of the like deepest and most intimate relationships in the whole book. And then she also has a friendship with her other friend, Sam, and then the relationship, the romantic relationship between her and Cameron. And so I really just wanted to focus on the fact that like this is what it's like to be in a relationship with autistic people. Like with Naima particularly, she has a falling out with one of her friends because she forgets his birthday party because her mind is like somewhere else. And even though she set all these reminders, she still forgot. And so they have a falling out over that, because that's something that happens. Like sometimes, particularly with ADHD, there's a lot of forgetfulness. And I wanted to show like this is what it shows up as in your relationship. Sometimes that flaky friend is just someone who's like neurodivergent. So I have an audience question from Mariah Renee, who asked, how do you remain on track throughout the process when there's so many side projects to distract you?
Oh, fun times. So there is a book by Stephen Pressfield called The War for Art. And basically the way that what he does in that book is that he creates this concept around the idea of going pro, where he's like, if you write stuff, that's one thing if you're just a person that writes stuff. But if you want to be a professional writer, that word professional means something, and it influences your behavior and the way that you act. So I really took that book to heart. So as a result, I have like a very specific and distinct process for my writing, because it's something that I take really seriously. I don't leave it up to kind of like the muse or when the inspiration hits. I've reached the point where when I sit down and I say, it's time to write, I flip the switch and I write until I decide to turn it off. And then I'll come back and do it whenever. I get tired sometimes, but ultimately, I think discipline is the key. It's like all my projects and stuff, they're projects, but like they're products, they're books. They exist on the shelf in order for people to buy. Each book plays a specific role in the overall longevity and path of my career. So I kind of have to treat it like a product instead of art when I'm not writing it. Like when I'm writing it, it's like, wow, look at this artsy thing that I'm doing. When I'm not writing it, it's like, that is a product. That is a book. And just like any product or anything that people make, there are timelines, there are expectations, there are budgets, there are constraints. And looking at it like that helps me stay on track.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the inspiration. I think it was Octavia Butler who said that she doesn't rely on inspiration. Habit is more dependable. And so for me, when it is time to write, there I have done a lot of different things to remain on track. One, I was in a writing group, and so that was extremely helpful for me because every month I had to submit a piece to my group, and then we workshopped it. So that was a way to keep me accountable because I was like, I have to write something this month. So I had to sit down and write it. In terms of actually sitting down and writing a book, like you just have to carve out time and be like, okay, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to write. What that looks like for me tends to be like, I think about how much I can write in a sitting, which is a few thousand words, and then I cut that in half and be like, okay, today I'm gonna write 1,000 words. If I get to 1,000, great. If I don't, at least I tried, and I'm going up on my word count. And I try to do that as often as I can. And I try not to beat myself up too much because I know if I beat myself up too much, I'll start spiraling. I won't go back to the page. I'm going to be guilty. I'm going to be ashamed. So all of these things are going to come up for me. And so I'm like, okay, we're going to try our best to write today. And if I don't write today, there's tomorrow. And usually doing that, I am able to like finish a first draft in a few months. So we have another question from Yesenia. How do you deal with imposter syndrome?
You go first.
Oh, I think for me, I still deal with imposter syndrome sometimes. Like right now, I am starting a YouTube and a lot of people are watching me. And that is very nerve-wracking for me. And I try my best not to delete my videos if they get too much attention. But I try to remind myself that I am doing this thing. Like I have done it. I cannot have imposter syndrome about something I've already done because I've proven to myself that I've done this thing. And so that is something I try to remind myself. Sometimes I do slip up and be like, well, I'm not doing it good enough. So I need to find out how to do it better. But I try my best to remember, like, I am doing the thing. I cannot be an imposter or a fraud if I'm already doing the thing. Like if I'm writing a book, I'm an author. I can't be an imposter because I'm doing the work.
I generally consider myself a very kind person, but my unkind point of view on this, I have two. Number one, if I feel imposter syndrome, then my general response is, okay, so stop being an imposter. If you feel like there's something about you that is stopping you, if you feel like there's something about you that disqualifies you from being able to hold the title you hold, figure out what that thing is and go get better at it if you feel like you're an imposter. But also, like, I don't even get to that point because I'm a writer. I read a lot of books. I don't like 80% of what I write, of what I read. There are books that are like New York Times bestseller, National Award nominee, National Book Award nominees, and I think they're hot garbage, trash. Majority of the books that I read, I do not like. So if this book that I think is hot garbage can get nominated for a National Book Award, then like, does it really matter if I'm an imposter? Like, I don't. This was never about merit in the first place. So what are we like? What? Why am I holding myself? Why am I holding myself up to that standard? Especially in an industry where the amount of followers that you have, or who you know, or your skin color, or the fact that your agent is from a specific agency can lead to giant deals, publication opportunities, things like that. It's like majority of the things that make stuff pop in this industry aren't even directly related to me. So even if I am an imposter, that's fine. As long as everyone else on the team isn't, we'll be okay. It'll be fine.
Yeah, you said something that reminded me of like Nikki Giovanni. She talked about how like the Pulitzer list, the National Book Award, a lot of those books are not well done. They aren't great stories, but they are promoted, like you said, because of something somebody knows. And I think it helps to come to the realization that we don't live in a meritocracy. I think a lot of us want to believe we do, and that the best people are at the top. And if I'm at the top, I must not be the best. And it's like, I hate to say this, especially if you're a marginalized person and you're in these spaces, you're probably one of the best people there.
The publishing industry is not a place inherently built on merit. You profit from networking, and even like, well, who gets the opportunity to network? Where do you network with people? Conferences. How do you get to conferences? You either pay out of pocket or your publisher sends you. Well, if publishers don't publish a lot of Black books and they don't have a lot of sales data around Black books, and therefore they don't invest in the conferences, how do I get to the conferences to build the network to allow me to blah, 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 blah. There are so many things that are out of my control. So like, and it kind of fuels my delusions. I'm like, there are so many elements of this process that I didn't have my hands on, that if something goes wrong or something isn't received well, there's a much higher likelihood that it's somebody else's fault rather than mine. I'm like, imposter? Me? Never that. I'm amazing. But also, if you can't get an imposter's book to sell, that's on you as a publisher. You know, I'm like, it's fine. I've seen you selling like Lil Nas X had a book called C is for Country. It was like a children's picture book that came out, and I'm like, you can sell Lil Nas X's book. My book does not have to be the Odyssey for you to sell it.
Any final words you have,
Uh,
Tony?
I'm grateful for your time. Go read WEIRDO. Everyone read WEIRDO.
Okay, and I am also grateful that y'all have joined us today. And my book About the Boy is out. It's available wherever books are sold online. And thank y'all for having us. Thank y'all for listening to us today. Bye, y'all.
Bye.